The last pass that we need to create is this building dust. This is the dust from the pieces of the helicopter that hit the building. You can see this is how the final result is going to look. If a piece hits the building with high speed, there is some dust. We're assuming it's an old building, a piece of or a part of its coating, its outer layer got damaged, and the dust falls towards the ground. This is what we will try to simulate. So let's start with creating some good colliders. First, let me just put my Houdini on the auto mode. We're viewing through the camera. I'm importing my simulation of the helicopter. And there we will do a similar thing like we did before. We'll pack the helicopter. And then we will create a bound from the buildings. We have our buildings. Remember, we created a geometry for particle simulation. We're importing this geometry and we're creating a bound around it. And we will use this bound to isolate the pieces that are close to the building because these are the only ones we care about right now. And then we'll blast everything that is far away from the building. And then we can unpack the pieces. We needed to pack them only for this process. And then what we do is we have now our heli pieces near the building without any unnecessary attributes. And here we have a collision of both the pieces of the helicopter and the building. We will need that later for our particle simulation. This is our geometry collider. Let me turn off our template. This is our geometry collider. And we'll need a volume collider from the same items for the Pyro simulation. So the collisions are done. After that, let's get to creating the sourcing for the simulation itself. We're bringing those pieces near the building, and we're doing a very similar process to what we've done for the ground and the dust. We're measuring the size of the pieces so that we can delete the very small ones. I'm going to go a little bit closer and I'm going to bypass this node. You can see very small ones are gone. After that, we are creating a speed by calculating the length of the velocity. And we did that before through a simple attribute wrangle where we wrote speed equals length of v, but we can do the same operation through attribute adjust vector and just turn on the length. Then we have the speed attribute here. So I'm showing you just another way of doing exactly the same thing. And then I want to remove some pieces by speed. So any piece that moves with a speed less than 10 meters a second is being deleted. Okay, and I'm doing that because there are some pieces that will be stuck on the ledges of the building or they will be on the ground near the bottom of the building, just laying there. And when the piece is pretty much static near the building, I don't want to consider it for dust emission. And after that, I am scattering some points onto those pieces, simple points, scattering them by density, and I'm giving them red color. You're already recognizing the process. We did something very similar in our ground dust. Then we have the buildings themselves. Well, we are coloring them in black, and we are doing the same process as we did before, where we have a color transfer from the pieces. Let me go a little bit back where we have more pieces hitting the building, maybe somewhere even here 37. Let me view through the camera. Yeah, we have some pieces hitting the building and this will be our sourcing. I'm adding a little bit of noise to this CD to the color and scattering by color. So here will be our sourcing from the building. You will notice that on the right side, I'm manually importing. Let me just go back through and view through the camera. I'm manually importing more of the helicopter, but I'm isolating manually this front part because, you know, the front part in if you look at our final shot, part of the helicopter hits the building and we want some extra dust. Here we want to make sure that when this corner is hit, there is some dust emitted because the impact is pretty strong. So I'm scattering some points onto this front part, coloring them also in red, and I'm doing a separate attribute transfer where actually I'm controlling differently the distance and the blend so that I definitely have some distribution here. And then I'm merging the two. I have my sources of the pieces here, and this is my extra source from the front part of the helicopter. After that, I'm just making sure that I'm deleting everything that doesn't have enough color in it. And I'm removing also pieces that are too slow. nothing in this case, but if we had some stray points that got stuck somewhere, that will be our check that we remove them. After that, I'm caching my sourcing, and if I scroll, that's what's going to happen. We have some points appearing all over the building. Okay, looks good to me. After that, let's create some density. Right now, we just make density equals color. Nothing else, no changes yet. Then we are calculating the speed again. So we have our speed attribute now, and I'm deleting the points that are too slow. After that, let's create some velocity. Let's see in our visualizer, what we have right now is the velocity that comes from the points themselves. Let me show you. This is our original velocity because the points inherited the velocity of the pieces. But here in create v, what I'm doing is I'm doing interpolation between the original velocity and the normals of the building. Why? Because if I have a building, let me just template this building. If I have a building and I will have some dust from it, most likely dust is going to be shooting outwards in the direction of the normals from the building. So, and I also don't want to avoid situations where the velocity is going to try to penetrate the building and hit and try to emit some dust into the building. So we want to combine the two. Let me go back. Here is my visualizer. And you see, this is just an interpolation between normalized V and the normals. So it's mostly skewed towards normalized V's. Let me go. Here are completely the normals. And here I'm considering just the velocity. So it was 0, I believe 166 that we had before. So we have a little bit of a mix. After that, I'm adding another operation where I'm doing the absolute in the x direction, and here you see the x is actually, this is the building, and it's looking in the x direction. So like we did before with our dust on the ground, when we wanted to avoid any dust going downwards, here we want to avoid any dust going into the building. And after that, as usual, I'm adding a little bit of noise, and there are two operations here. The first one is I am just adding the noise both in the direction and length. And in another one, I'm doing multiply just in the length. So some parts are going to be have stronger velocity, some weaker. And that's it. After that, our source is ready, and we are going to run it through a popnet. Let me just go into a manual node, and let's see what is happening in this popnet. Again, super simple setup. We are bringing in all our points. Here, all points. And in the birth, they are allowed to live for 0.1 second with a little bit of variance. And in the attribute, you can see I'm greatly multiplying the velocity. So the particles are going to shoot out of the areas of the impact. And I'm adding a little bit of a pop wind here. And here in our static objects, we are bringing in our geometry collision, and we needed a geometry collider here because I'm actually setting some physical attributes here, and I want to have proper higher SGO like we have, so that the computation of the friction and dynamic friction scale is done properly. So I have my geometry here. And then in the collisions, for the actual computation of the collisions, I'm using my volume sample, and this is my volume for the buildings that we prepared just a few minutes earlier. That's it. After the simulation is cached and done, what we will see, let me just play it. I think I need to turn my Houdini on auto mode first, but if we play here, we have those splashes of, show you again, we have those splashes of dust. And this is our sourcing. After that, what I'm going to do is, before I can bring this sourcing into the Pyro simulation, I'm going to adjust the velocity. Let me just visualize this velocity. I'm going to adjust this velocity by age. You can see as the particles are aging, I want them to, the velocity to die down. This way I can avoid some ugly, strong puffs of dust. As the particle goes more outwards, its velocity dies off, and we are turning it into a volume. Yeah? And as before, we want to use our top rotor wind volume in our Pyro simulation, so this comes in as well. And as colliders, we're using the same colliders as before. This is my helicopter and the building. Remember here above what we did, we isolated the part of the helicopter that is just close to the building, because that's what we need as collisions here. This dust is not going to be flying too far away, so we don't care about any other colliders. Let me go on the manual mode and see what we have in this Pyro Solver. Let's go to the setup. And this is the usual, very, very similar to what we have for the ground dust. So these parameters are the same. The time scale was increased a little bit. And again, it was some experimentation when I figured that I wanted this dust to fall a little bit faster for the explosiveness of it to be more visible, more to feel the explosiveness more. And increasing time scale helped me with it. We have our collisions, and you see here collisions, I reduced them even more to 0.25 for the same reason as with the dust on the ground. So to avoid any strong puffs, I'm controlling the velocity through sourcing instead. And in the sourcing, we have the density, we have our velocity, and we have our top rotor wind. Then in the fields tab, we have a little bit of a dissipation. And in the shape, we are again using our density influences gravity like we did with the helicopter dust. Especially on the building, this is, I think it's a pretty cool feature. You can see before and after how it looks with and without the feature. With the density influences gravity, you really see how nice the dust is falling down as if it's really some heavy material from the old paint outside the building. After we cached our Pyro Solver, let me just turn off this template and turn on our auto mode. What we get is this puffs of dust. Let's take a look how it looks in LOPs. We are in our LOP context and we're checking LOP test 011. Let me go to my assigned material and I will give it a second for everything to load. Let's view everything through the camera and let's check Karma XPU. Here we go. We've been checking the dust on the right side. Remember, we created some extra dust here from the front part of the helicopter, and we have the dust here from the pieces. So everything is working and everything is rendered through Karma.